Oh, hello. I'm Paula Butterfield, and I'm the author of this book, La Luministe. It's about the first woman impressionist artist. She was called La Luministe by the other guys in the group, Monet, Degas, and Renoir, because they said she painted with light. I developed and taught classes about women artists for 20 years, and now I write books about them. And this is my first one, more to come. I'm going to read some snippets from the chapter that's about the German siege of Paris in the book. And I'll pause for questions and comments that you can type into the little box in the lower right-hand corner. Here's a couple of prints by Barrett Morisseau, in case you're not familiar with her. And let me just start by giving a little mini TED Talk. One of the benefits of reading historical fiction is that we can apply what we learn from history to our lives today. I thought I knew Barrett Morisseau after researching her for years, but as lockdown began last March, I felt I truly got to know her on another level by experiencing something like what she experienced when Paris was under siege in 1871. Admittedly, lying on the couch next to the fireplace watching Netflix and consuming copious snacks gave me a leg up on Barrett. But let's not forget the constant background anxiety of this last year's presidential campaign. So what can we learn by comparing the plight of Paris during the Franco-Prussian War with the coronavirus crisis? First, a quick background on Barrett Morisseau. She had many obstacles to overcome. She wasn't particularly interested in marriage, and as the pool of eligible bachelors who might tolerate her passion for painting shrank, her parents became obsessed with marrying her off before it got too late. Barrett was more bothered by the fact that the Académie des Beaux-Arts, the art institution, did not admit women. This meant that not only did women not receive art training, but they didn't have access to studios provided by the Academy, and they didn't have potential patrons stopping by to looking for paintings to buy. But all of Barrett's problems paled in comparison when France declared war on Germany, and Germany promptly turned around and put Paris under siege. By looking at the issues Barrett faced during the German siege of Paris, deprivation, illness, and finally transformation, we can explore how to look at dark times as precursors to possibilities. So 50,000 Parisians froze or starved to death during the winter months of 1871. Even Americans sitting in their cars in miles-long lines for food banks haven't had it that bad, although the winter isn't over yet. Still, I think we can all agree as we complete the third trimester of this pandemic that this gestational period needs to be coming to an end. Our French counterparts were resourceful in their desperate search for fuel and food. The Bois de Boulogne, which, along with Portland's Forest Park, is the only forest within city limits on this planet, was completely denuded of trees. People were reduced to sacrificing the zoo animals and eating rat pate, horse hooves, and a bread substitute made of straw and beans. Just to give you a taste, so to speak, of what Parisians endured, here's a snippet of a scene describing Barrett Morisseau's deprivations. She was in lockdown in her parents' house, and she's sick in bed. "You know you've become prone to melancholy, dear," Mama said, laying her hand against my forehead to check for fever. "This is the worst it's ever been, Mama." I pulled my shawl tighter and my duvet closer, but they were no match for the frigid winter, the coldest in memory. The ground was frozen to a depth of over 1 foot. With no heat, the windows were panes of ice, and our breath came out in puffs. "It all comes of not eating. If you would only have some consommé, I'm sure your disposition would improve." Mama thought that she could argue me out of illness, when the very mention of food or what passed for food that winter made my stomach cramp again. We were on a diet of horse flesh. Donkey was regarded as a feast fit for princes. Our maid, Paisy, did her best to make her roasts edible, but nothing could convince me to even try a bite. Okay, now I'm going to pause and ask you for comments or questions. Thinking about the deprivations you might have experienced as a reader, a writer, or an artist, um, artists and writers are expected to go on creating despite poverty, worry, fear, or fatigue. We're charged with making sense of what's going on, or especially in hard times, haven't you heard that Shakespeare wrote King Lear during the plague? Author Deanne Rayborn shared on Twitter, "I've written one book, revised another, wrote a proposal for a third, and some days I just eat fries and cry into my box wine. It's called self-care." So I'm wondering, have you been able to create? Have you not been able to create? What kind of self-care are you doing? Any comments or thoughts about that? Or you can just think about it and we can address all the questions at the end. I think about the artistic deprivations we've had. Of course, the museums are closed. Bookstores, movies, live performances. Of course, Barrett didn't have Netflix, or was she able to order books on Kindle through Amazon? So we're really lucky in those ways. But still, there is a deprivation that goes on. So much for deprivation. As for illness, as of today, Americans have suffered a loss of over, this is according to this morning's New York Times, 313,740 deaths from COVID-19. We now have a vaccine, so it looks like our social isolation and fear of illness will gradually subside. But there was no such guarantee in late 19th century Paris. Here's another passage about how Barrett Morisseau spent the siege sick in bed, her weak lungs succumbing to bronchitis, and in danger of losing her vision permanently. Not good for an artist. Boom. It was 10 o'clock. For the last 3 weeks, the Prussians had bombarded the city every night. It wasn't enough that Paris starved. We were to be deprived of sleep, the only hours when we didn't think of our hunger, as well. The house shook and my head rang. It would have made me feverish if I were not already in that state. And the odors. Following our family physician's instructions, I kept a cloth over my oozing eyes, and my lack of eyesight resulted in a keener sense of smell. Every breath was tainted by the stink of gunpowder, and I could not begin to describe the foul stench following the bombing of the chemical plant across the Seine, surely the cause of my eye infection. I peeled the cloth off my eyes, and the explosions outside my windows blossomed into many-colored flowers that, with my poor vision, resembled smeared paints. "Would you like to study your fan, mademoiselle?" Paisy asked. "Oui, that would occupy me," I said. Paisy took the fan down from where it hung on the wall and brought it to me. It was a gift from Degas, who had painted on it a scene of Spanish dancers and musicians, done in watercolors and brown ink. I examined the figures as best I could through gummy eyes. The fan was the only beautiful thing I had to cling to for the time being, but it helped. It's hard to believe that this horrific period of enforced hibernation could have yielded a positive result. Yet many artists and writers have experienced illnesses that allowed them the time to read or create, to just stop and concentrate on that, resulting in a lifelong devotion to their art. I write about women artists, so I happen to know that Faith Ringgold was often kept at home because of asthma. That's when her mother taught her to sew. Voila, story quilts. And Frida Kahlo spent much of her life confined to bed as a result of injuries incurred when she was a teenager. She set up a mirror and started the series of self-portraits that she was famous for. James Joyce endured 11 eye surgeries, and Aldous Huxley was partially blind from a childhood illness. George Orwell suffered through multiple bouts of tuberculosis. He was dying of TB when he wrote 1984. The story got darker as he got sicker. All of these artists and writers learned to be creative within their confines in a way they might not have otherwise. Contemporary writer and photographer Lauren Jonick, who lives with chronic illness, says, "Illness never visits without requiring change. Sometimes that change is a huge transformation, such as the one Barrett experienced. Here's a last little bit from Barrett. In that barren winter of war, I could not ignore stark realities. It was long past time for my parents to be looking after me, and I was not a dilettante working to become someone's accomplished wife. It was not enough to work at developing my own artistic style. Someday, and soon, I must become an independent professional artist, supporting myself with my own earnings. As I folded my fan, I began to feel something, like a warm ember in a cold stove. It was my pride in being an artist. If a small fan could give me hope, what could larger, lovely paintings bring to the world? If I regained my sight, no, when I regained it, I would make my living by painting scenes that would bring light and beauty into people's lives. I wanted to shout this vow to the world, but instead I reached into the drawer of my bedside table, pulled out the paintbrush Edouard Manet had brought me, and began brushing the air, painting a scene that only I could see. My purpose was now as luminous as the searchlight on the Arc de Triomphe, and no one would deter me. If I had indeed survived the war, then I must be strong enough to fulfill that purpose. I reached for another straw cracker. So on the brink of death, Barrett's desire to become an artist, which had been thwarted by her parents' ambition to get her married well and by an art establishment that excluded women, crystallized with laser focus into a determination to fulfill her destiny at any cost. Joseph Campbell writes that the black moment is when the real transformation is going to come. I don't know about you, but I usually only learn things when I'm up against a wall. So here are some more questions, and I hope there's somebody out there who would like to comment or ask some questions. What have you learned from the pandemic? What if, after deprivation and illness, we now embrace new possibilities? How can we push in a new, positive direction? Okay. Here's a couple of good comments. Benjamin, hard time working on his novel, but he has shifted and is writing more poetry. I bet that's because maybe you have a shorter attention span, and started painting. The COVID blues have shifted the media I work in. Yeah, that's interesting. And there was a question right before then that I missed. Okay, 100 years from now, looking back. Okay, wait. We're going to the first question. Elizabeth, it's hard on some days to do much of anything, but writing is how I function on most. Okay, I'm slower this year. Grief is a wet blanket. Yeah. Looking back, what will they write about us? And as Julie, what will they say about our artists? That will be interesting. I think that a lot of people aren't necessarily, and tell me what you think too, not necessarily writing about the pandemic, but things that are tangentially related will come out. Writing about things where you feel constricted or restrained in some way, maybe, I don't know. And as far as motivation, a couple of your other questions referred to that. At first, I was very motivated. Let's face it, going to another country in another time is a great escape from being confined to your home. So I was writing like a mad woman and got a lot done. And then about mid-August, and I heard from a lot of other people who said this happened at the same time, I just hit a wall. Like, it's not over yet? What am I supposed to do? And then it took a couple of months to get back in the swing of things again. And, that's fine. We do what we can do. Okay, did NaNoWriMo. Whatever thoughts, chats, emails I could put into written words. That's interesting. Okay, and then here's some self-care. Reminding myself this is creative work, even though it doesn't feel creative. Research, notes, query letters. Let's talk about those notes. I think a lot of people who can't focus on their work, this takes me back to when I was a new mother. You can't work, but you have a thought. Okay, scribble it on a napkin or a receipt and stick it in a drawer. I'm telling you that once you go back, it'll get you going. When you have time to get going, you'll have like these little prompts that will get you going. You might find 5 of the notes say the same thing, which means it was really on your mind, but it's all a part of creativity. Don't get on your case about not, I don't know, producing 2 albums in 9 months like Taylor Swift. Don't worry about it. Okay, if there aren't any more questions right now, I'll keep going. All right, so going back to what we've learned from the pandemic, I think a lot of people have thought about where's the first place you want to travel, who's the first person you want to see. And then there's shifting your personal priorities. I think working at home has made people look at things in another way. Maybe we don't have to commute a few hours a day. Maybe we can sort of integrate more our family life or our personal life with our jobs. I know it's hard. Well, we've seen what happens when we're gentler with the environment, and maybe we can somehow try to keep working on that. That would be nice. So think about it and maybe tell us, do you know what you want to laser focus on when we're out of this thing? Okay, back to Barrett. In 1874, just 3 years after the siege of Paris, the Impressionists had formed a movement and held their first exhibition. Barrett Morisseau went on to an internationally successful career, and following her example, perhaps we too can come out of our 3rd trimester of this having given birth to something. It's almost solstice, the light is returning. By summer, hopefully, we'll all have had our vaccinations and we'll be looking back at this time in the rearview mirror. If you have produced a King Lear equivalent during this pandemic, nice. Maybe you've got the ideas percolating that you're not even aware of yet. I'm a big believer it's always percolating, and then it's time to start listening and focus and figure out what you're thinking about. Start jotting down those notes. Or maybe all you did was survive this horrific year. Congratulations. I am going to leave you with some encouraging words by Chuck Wedig. Do you know who he is? Hilarious. It's the URL I put up at the top there. 25 reasons to keep on making stuff. And he wrote it as a form of resistance during the political climate we've been in. But his love and rage really apply to even any kind of creativity. Let's see. I hope you'll follow me on Twitter. I'm on all the social media, but that's the one I'm most active on. And several times a week, I post artwork by women artists with little factoids about them. It's a little bright spot in your day. I'd love to see you there. Also on Pinterest, I've put tons of illustrations of my novel. Okay, so you probably know someone whose Yola Bokaflod would be perfect if you gave them my book. You can buy it at the sites. There's going to be some sites listed on the screen, is my understanding, but all the usual places. Thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts. I'd like to see some more responses or questions or comments to things before we go. We have just a few minutes that we can keep going. Does anybody know what they want to focus on creatively as soon as we're out of this pandemic? Let's say we've all had our vaccinations, our risk has really decreased, and we can kind of get back to work with more focus. Oh yeah, as cool as me. That's because I have on the Yola Bokaflod t-shirt. Now, you know the actual Yola Bokaflod is on Christmas Eve, and it's the most civilized of holidays. I hope you'll all be enjoying that. I know I put out my book list to my family, and I expect some good books. Let's see. Okay. Here's somebody who did take notes when they had little kids, and then you go back through them. I mean, if you can find them, that's the good start. And then, go back through them, see what you're thinking. Maybe your thoughts have changed since you jotted them down, but it's just something to get you going again. Okay. I see it says links to my books. Oh, in the chat. Okay, I don't see those. I'm just going to trust that they're there. Yeah, the artist quoted was Lauren Jonik. I think it's Jonik. That was one of them. She's the one who said, art always changes you in some way. Yeah, Lauren Jonik, that's right. Okay, so no more comments or questions from anyone. I thank you very much for showing up. I hope that you will, go to live readings when we get out of all this. And yeah, more live book selling events. That'll be great, won't it? Yeah, I've devoted next summer, I'm not going to write resolutions. I'm going to write a list of fun things I want to do and try to devote myself pretty seriously to hedonism because we deserve it. Okay, next up, I hope you go on and watch the rest of the talks and events that are going on. And thank you so much for coming.